Welcome everyone to another edition of Pulp Nonfiction. Today I have with me Marc Schouten of Broadreach Strategic Planning. I've known Marc for a few years. We cycled together, hence my funny hat. We're on the Better Outcomes team and we raise money for oral cancer research, the Dr. Michelle Williams Oral Cancer Research and Education Fund of the BC Cancer Agency. Looks like the ride this year, the 2020 ride, is going to be postponed to 2021 because of the COVID. It's hard for people to get together and meet up in groups, and it's such a big event at the end of August. They have about anywhere from, I think, 3,000 to 7,000 riders, depending on the year, and it's just too uncertain to plan. But well, let's talk about dollars and cents here. Today, Marc, we'll chat about the financial implications of the virus. We'll also have a session about insurance, and then we'll also have another interview. I believe we're bringing in Chris from Calgary and chatting about the government. Everyone knows Albertans love to talk about government, so we'll bring in Chris for that. That sound like a plan? Roll with it. Tell us a little bit more about Super Chris. Cancer fighting superhero Marc. We'll leave Chris for the other interview. Roll with it.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Joel. Yeah, so Marc Schouten, pleasure of riding with Joel as a rider on Team Better Outcomes, Broadreach is a financial planning firm. We're kind of a boutique firm, not a large name, but very boutique. We work almost exclusively with the dental community, with dentists, practice owners, and specialists, and we're really on the strategic side of planning. So this is a perfect time to talk about some of the different areas that are impacted by COVID. I know the implications for the dental business can be sort of overwhelming, but I'm also finding people either are kind of diving into dealing with what the next steps are, or some people are sort of sitting back and saying, okay, I'm going to reassess some personal stuff or just take some time and watch a whole lot of Netflix, which you normally don't get to do. So great thing to be able to talk about today. It's funny, I put together some slides. I do a lot of presentations and not as many interviews. So it's kind of a neat format, but I find I tend to go back to making slides and think about what I'm going to talk about. But I was going through the slides and I had to bring this up and I had to laugh because it really feels like the situation that we're looking at today. And I realized this was actually from my presentation about the July 18th, 2017 tax proposals. Which was this, especially this will be, all the dentists in Canada will know about this, but this was a package of tax proposals basically almost explicitly calling dentists, implying that they were tax cheats and that people were playing all sorts of games and things. And, it really felt like the world was ending. And I think this sort of has put it into a little bit of perspective, but one of the things we've talked about too is that some of the more egregious things in this that they didn't follow through with, but were some outrageous changes that they were proposing. Something even as outlandish as the idea that if you lend money to your corporation, you lend $100,000 to your corporation to buy some equipment from your personal assets after tax money. They actually were proposing a rule that would make you have to pay the capital back as a dividend. Now, if you were sufficiently established that you were able to borrow that from a bank, yeah, the bank can get their capital back. But if you wanted to take your personal capital back, you would have to pay that out as a dividend to yourself. They were outrageous proposals, but we also have to remember these were the same people that are working with, that are in charge currently. So it's something to keep in mind about what to plan for in the future or what to be aware of.
Yeah, one of the things, it was cheaper for you to sell to sell your farm to a corporation than would be to a family member. And I think that was the nail in the coffin for them, because that got basically Saskatchewan and Manitoba and large parts of Alberta saying, and I guess Quebec, nuts to you guys. Why would it be tax disadvantageous for us to sell our farm to our children rather than a corporation? And I think that's what our saving grace was, because I think the public's sympathy for dentists and most small business owners is barely palatable. It's there, but for farmers, it's definitely palatable. And I think, I don't know, just from my outside perspective, because I remember we rallied the troops and we were trying our best. And, because you're a dentist, people are like, well, you just, you're just trying to, feather your own bed. And it's like, well, no, any small business,
Yeah.
Tom's convenience store down the road there, if he needs to do something, it applies to him. So anyway,
Yeah.
crazy times. They've passed us. He got voted back in.
Yeah.
Onwards and upwards. Now we have a virus to deal with.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the time that needs strong leadership.
Yes.
So
strong leadership for your company.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, we won't.
Yeah.
Digress.
This could be the whole hour. This could be the whole half hour, but this is and this is something to sort of keep in mind. I was talking with a client about this. Who had become and had actually become quite emotional during the tax proposals around feeling attacked as a business owner, and actually as a person who had previously supported the Trudeau government, where they had said, look, I haven't done anything wrong. Like, why are they coming after? Why are they saying that I'm a tax cheat? Same family. We were talking about what the implications of this would be, and I said, okay, well, let's sit down and take a look. Let's take a look at your plan. I use a program called Snap, and we took a look at their financial plan. This is one dentist spouse works in the dental practice, but doing basic work, not doing dentistry. I think they earn about $100,000 a year. We made some basic assumptions for their financial plan. This is the way it was structured before, and said, okay, look, based on your current plan, they don't have a lot of debt. They have a decent income. Things look quite rosy. They spend about $200,000 a year outside of mortgages and repayments and stuff. And I said, okay, look, this is where we are currently. No COVID. And I said, okay, let's make the assumption that COVID's going to cost you 3 months of revenue fully, 3 months of 50% revenue. But then they said, we think we're going to be back to normal. And I think, Joel, you've probably made a good point that, probably costs are going to rise and things. But for their sake, said, okay, let's just assume that. And let's assume that once this shakes out across their portfolio, they're down about 15%. So I said, let's just take a 15% haircut off the portfolio and see where we end up. Snap planning, I set this out to age 100. Said, okay, well, your peak net worth went from being 10.4 million. Well, we went down to 10.1 million. Doesn't move the needle too much. And your terminal net worth was a little more impacted, but you're still well over $6 million of money that, from their perspective, now they're involved with the church, and their goal is to support, to pass money within their family, but also they have quite a large philanthropic goal. Said, look, we barely moved the needle. When we look at these two things back to back, these two graphs don't look significantly different. It's a scary time. It's a frightening time, but we know that you've made the right decisions and have done the right things around cash flow. So once we've worked on cash flow and we know that you're going to be able to survive long enough to get through this, when things get back to normal, we're going to be looking at we think we'll be looking at a very similar world. We made some assumptions that practices will still be worth the same amount approximately, and that costs won't go completely crazy. I think if costs go up a lot, I think we're just by necessity, we're going to have to see the fee guide, or we're going to have to see special costs for PPE or something like that to recover costs. But I think over the long term, I think we'll be back there. Their plan was to retire at 50. I said, if you want to stay exactly on track, you might need to work to 50 and a half now, or 51 or 52. They're both 37. So And Sam's not his real name. That's my whenever I make somebody into an example, I use Sam Pole.
Bill would appreciate that. Oops.
It's not a Bill either.
Yeah.
So, but that's, and so in talking with them, basically at this point, we're more than a month into this thing. We got sent home from the office. We were a PDC. And so we were watching Dr. Bonnie Henry, the BC health person, saying, okay, based on what happened at PDC, you have to go home. You need to quarantine for the rest of the time. Yeah. I've been home since March 15th. And so we're more than a month into this thing. The changes that this couple made and that most of the people that I'm working with have made are the obvious ones. Some mortgage deferral if it was necessary, deferring leases with their company, talking to their landlord, seeing if they can have a break on rent and what have you. That's been sort of hit and miss. Haven't seen a lot of breaks on rent, but certainly applying for the other things. And then government benefits we're going to jump into in a different talk. The other side that we talked about with this couple too was, this is the time when a portfolio needs to be rebalanced. In our case, we work with discretionary fund managers. The rebalance happens automatically. It's based on the risk tolerances, and because the stocks have dropped in value, the overall value of the fixed income bonds have increased as a percentage of the portfolio. Once you rebalance that, we take some money out of bonds, let's say, we put that into the equity side. We know that as we're on this big drop in equities, if we are in fact investing at the bottom of the curve, we know that we should capture more of the upside and get ourselves back above zero sooner, or back above where we were, let's say, at the start of the year.
Right. So taking things out of conservative and putting them into the market because the market's down, and the tidal raise all boats. So it's a good opportunity. The bread's for sale. Everyone's selling their bread super cheap. Now's a good time to buy bread, right?
Yeah. We know on average this is the hardest time to make that decision, right? The reason I work with discretionary fund managers, they make the decisions on my behalf. They understand my risk tolerances. They understand my profile.
But for the average person, like let's go back to the dentist. Like we're speaking to the dentist, so coach the dentist.
If you're working with somebody, I mean, a lot of people in the professional market will deal with discretionary people, but if not. If you're managing your own portfolio, or if you have money in a bunch of different mutual funds, this really is a good time to basically take a look at your overall structure. Go back to the basic KYC, the stuff that your investment people will have done, and say, okay, are we still balanced properly? Do I still have the right money in the right places? So
it's a good time to move some money from conservative to more market-based investments, because the market is so cold right now because of fear, and it's great potential for it to go up. Is that the
it is
investment for dummies summary?
Yeah, we know on average, as long as we make decisions like that, we know on average we are going to do better if we follow that trajectory.
Yeah, because one of the things is I have money coming out each month to an investment for the company, and because of cash flow, I stopped it, and it's like it hurts to stop it because it's the best time I'm buying the most stock with it, even though it's a rather conservative investment. Rather blue chip companies, it's kind of that really hard thing to do, because you're like, I just need, I'm running on fumes, as most offices are. So the tap's been turned off. You're running on fumes. So I've turned off as many things as I can, getting the leeches off the company. Any breaks that I can get, talking to the telephone company, talking to this, talking to that. I had ceiling TVs in, and so I canceled the TV. But they said, no, we'll just give you 2 months free instead of canceling. So you're like, okay, I'll take that. So put all that aside, and then it's tough, but I got to do it. Is stop taking that money out each month and putting in investment, even though it's the best time to buy. I need that nest egg. And Canada, you can get that $30,000 loan from the federal government, and then or $40,000 loan from the federal government, and then as long as you pay it back by, and we'll get more into that another time. By Christmas next year, they'll forgive 10, which is great if it comes. And we'll talk more about other programs. But yeah, that's one of the things. This is now at this time in this crisis, everyone's concerned. It's good to stand back and relook at your investments. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, and I mean there is an emotional toll to doing it. There are a lot of people that aren't going to want to open that statement that came in the mail or log into their system and take a look at where the numbers are, because we always benchmark, but we always benchmark to wherever we were the highest, and we say I lost between the highest and where I am now, right? It's just human nature. We say, I had this much, I sold exactly at this point. If you go back to what the money that you actually put in, what your invested capital was, it's probably going to be easier to sort of, to see what the trajectory of that was, assuming that you didn't invest in, December of 2019. It's going to be easier to, if you can keep it in that perspective. There are also portfolios out there that still have significant gains. And so, from a tax perspective, there are certain things that make sense to sell and take your gains and reset the floor. But those sorts of decisions, it is a good time to do those things. I like the idea of rebalancing. I have a number of clients, especially younger clients, who still have access to their student line of credit, which converted to a business line of credit. And they're taking money out to invest in the stock market, usually in very specific areas, taking money out from their lines of credit to invest for their sakes. They're starting out, they've already established good incomes. If $10,000 of investment that they're playing with in their TFSA keeps them engaged and active, great. The point I always make to them is, look, you're not running a business where you're needing to be able to rely on cash flow. Cash flow is like blood flow. If it stops, everything stops. It will be. I know you're having to make a decision to say, well, I'm not going to invest as much as I could into at sort of the best time. The best investment you still have is your practice and is still the business that you've made. It's going to make more money for you long term than any investments will. So that's the number one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The money making machine. I'm
I'm
sounding horrible on your end. I sound like Darth Vader. I think you might want to turn your speaker down a bit there. I am your father.
Hey, you sound perfectly fine on my side.
Okay. For a second there, it came through pretty great. Okay, so that's great. So what's your best prediction on how? I saw that over the long term, it won't affect you, dentists, harshly as long as they're wise with their investments. So don't go selling all your stock right now and stick everything in the GIC. It's and GIC, for people who are not Canadian, it's a guaranteed investment certificate, so natural return. But yeah, try your best to look at this in a non-emotional state.
Yeah, that really will help. One thing I did want to mention, and this I'm just going to touch on briefly. This is something before, as we saw interest rates actually finally starting to rise again. We had an increase in April of 2018. We had the prescribed rate increase, and we're sort of looking at a situation where I know this is probably not something that people are necessarily thinking about off the top of their head right now, but this is something to be thinking about going forward. This is a fairly common situation. Those last tax proposals, when we had those changes, they made it much harder to income split under the new TOSI rules that we have here. So basically where we were able to pay two people out of a corporation, two adults out of a corporation without any penalties. they basically said, well, if you have a non-working spouse, by virtue of the fact that they paid out of the corporation, everything is going to be paid at top marginal tax rate. For BC, that's 53.5%. So the amount of money that we can take out reasonably from a corporation really has dropped a lot. That's hurt a lot of our clients. So this is a structure that we had in place, and it's when I was reviewing my previous notes from a presentation, this is something that came up, and I thought, this is something to be mentioning because we've seen such a drastic drop in interest rates. We're expecting the prescribed rate to drop. The prescribed rate basically says that if one person lends money to another person, so that the income that's made from it doesn't get attributed back to the first person, you can, as long as you charge the prescribed rate, the second person is allowed to use that money for what they will to generate income. So I'll go through a quick example here. We have Diane, she's a working dentist. Jack's a stay-at-home dad. This is the sample I used from before. I used a 1% prescribed rate. Let's say Diane lends $500,000 to Jack. By the end of the year, Jack's going to have to pay Diane $5,000, 1% of that, for the right to use that money. And this would be money that we're deciding to invest. So in Diane's case, now she's top marginal tax rates, let's say she's around 50%. She might be a little higher, but for round numbers, 50%, she loses half the tax. So Diane earned $5,000 and she kept $2,500. Jack's side, let's say we assume that he makes 5% in the market. And at this point, the market's going up. Hopefully, we're going to be seeing more, but let's say conservatively makes 5%, makes $25,000, paid $5,000 to Diane. He's made $20,000. And he doesn't earn any other income, so essentially that's coming in tax-free. So overall, had Diane invested the money, she would have paid 50% in tax and had $12,500. Because we had Jack write a loan agreement to Diane, the family as a whole gets to keep $22,500. So between the two options, instead of Diane investing herself, we put it into Jack's hands. We've saved $10,000 just in tax with exactly the same investments. The reason I mention this now is that we expect the prescribed rate to be dropping. Once it does drop, once you write the loan agreement for this, you're allowed to write the loan agreement at the current prescribed rate ongoing. So you can lock in that rate. Even if we see interest rates jump after COVID and an economic recovery, that will be in place and we can hold the investment on, let's say, on Jack's side. Mm-hmm. So we should expect that. The other nice thing is we lost the ability to income split to adult children from corporations to pay for school, for example. So for a lot of clients that I have, because they weren't putting money into RESPs generally, because we had planned to take money out through the corporations to pay for education. Now we have another structure where we say, okay, now we can do this through this same structure. You can lend to your spouse, you can lend to your kids. Currently, that's a 2% minimum interest rate, the prescribed rate. It rose in April 2018. Our rates are already below 2018 rates or pre-print 2018 rates. So we should be seeing that come back down. The only tough part is if you've kept all your money in the corporation, you wouldn't be able to use retained earnings from your corporation for this. You would need to take it out, pay your personal tax to then be able to do this. But if you have money left in your corporation that you can take out tax efficiently, you have money, you have a positive balance in your CDA account, for example, this will let you access that. So taking that after-tax money, the first place I always say to people, look, obviously you can top up your spouse, non-working spouse's TFSA. That's usually step one.
Tax-free savings account for
tax-free
non-Canadians. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a small account, $60,000 that we're allowed to put money into, and any interest is non-taxable. But where we have needs beyond that, this is definitely something to consider.
And an RSP is a registered education savings plan that you can put money aside for kids, so that when they do go to school, you can take the money out and it's tax free at the time, but they're after tax dollars when you put the money into both those programs.
Yeah. And you get a bit of government matching. They top it up a little bit. In general, before the tax changes, they weren't on average beneficial for most of our clients. Now we've started using them, but there are fairly strong rules around how much you're allowed to put in. So it gives us another structure to be able to go to.
Yeah, for any new dentists out there, what I did when I started dentistry is I did the math. I figured out how much the government was going to contribute each year, and it's max. You can put 40,000 in during lifetime, and so to make sure that I got donated the maximum amount to get the maximum government subsidy each year, because it would kick in 500 if you donated so much, and also the sooner you get the money in, the longer it has to grow tax-free. So it's kind of that balance. You want it in soon, but you don't want it in too soon that then you can't contribute anymore and you're missing out on government things. So there's a kind of a fine number. And I remember I did the math on that, and it's been one of the best things for us was the RASPs. I know a lot of my friends did like what you advise your clients was, keep it in your corporation, keep your corporation. And I thought, the government gives you so few tax breaks. I'm like, I'm taking this. I understand the corporate thing, but corporate things can change. And this is something that affects everybody who gets a wage. And so I was like, they're really not going to mess with the RSPs very easily because it affects everybody. Whereas they can nail corporations easily. They can change the rules, which they've done. And so to our American friends, to Australians, to the Kiwis and people in the UK and Ireland, South Africa, like, the government's giving you a break and it affects everybody. That's a safer harbor than if the government gives you a break and it affects corporations or it affects professionals, because they don't have the voting power. And when times get tough, public sympathy for small business owners and dentists falls by the wayside. Because I remember when they brought in all those tax changes or proposed tax changes, and people were like, I don't know, on social media where they're just slamming it like, great, great, great. And you're like, oh my God, the Bolsheviks are out, and they would be like, you guys are rich, you guys are rich. You're like, this is like small corporations. This is like your lawn mowing guy, this is not just, and so capture whatever government benefit you can get. And if that government benefit is extending to the populace, then it's safer. That's my take-home point. That's my financial plan, and it worked out beautifully for us because I don't know many people, fellow dentists, who capitalized on the RSP like myself and my wife. Anyway, blah blah.
Yeah, we've always had some that did, and then some. We'd sort of look at the options at the time. The math of the current rules was clear, but it's the same as I have some business, some dentists who pay themselves exclusively in dividends, so as a share of profit, because the taxes are a little bit less, and stay away from any inclusion for salary.
But they've over the years they've now switched that, and the benefit for dividends has dropped, and so now it's almost worth your while.
So close.
And because the thing is, if you pay yourself a salary, then you get our RSP contribution, which is another government program. And so I know it's very Canadian centric, but if you take that to other jurisdictions, learn by our mistakes. If it's particularly good for corporations and dentists, they can change the rules on you, which they tried very hard in Canada, and they've done some changes, as you've shown very well here.
Thank you.
I digress.
In general, my perspective for a few years now really has been, given the risks that we see, my preference is sort of to pay yourself as a higher income. In Canada, it's about 96,000 is sort of the break where you get into the top 10%.
And 96,000 Canadians, about 76 American.
Be around, you take off a third, 90, 70-ish, So it's you know, at that rate, if you pay yourself that much salary, you do have to pay into the CPP, which is our sort of government pension plan. You know, it is a little bit painful for business owners to do that. Same with you. You know, you have to pay both sides of CPP, so you're paying 10% on top. But you're right. Being somebody who's included in the average, and then outside of that, my preference is to take more dividends outside of that amount, because beyond that, it ends up being pretty ludicrous on what we pay.
Yes.
You know, and that's something that I thought would be good to point out here. You know, these are just some quick things to keep in mind. Where the government's now in a deficit well over $100 billion. In the best of times, we were already well into deficits in the last go around with this government. The spending has gotten very high. And I think going forward, when we have the same people that brought out these 2017 tax proposals, we're going to need to think about what changes to expect, or how to insulate ourselves for changes going forward.
The hammer's about to fall again.
You know, and now the gloves are off, right? They've managed to hand out government money to a lot of people. And this might be their time to say, okay, well, here, this proves our direction was correct, and thank goodness you had us to be able to hand money out to you, and now we're going to punish those evil people who make too much. Now, it was never the small business owners who were honestly who were doing anything wrong or gaming the system. To my mind, it was dangling the keys to distract the kid, because we still haven't seen any material change on stock option plans. You know, for the ultra wealthy, we haven't seen the changes that are going to impact them. It's the working business owners that are going to be gone after, and small business is the engine of the Canadian economy. So
damn us for not making more sooner.
Well, had you been born with a multi-million-dollar trust fund, you'd be doing okay. It's unfortunate you chose to be to work hard and try to make the money yourself. It's not that's just not the way of things. So you know, so basically, what to watch out for: increases in tax rates. In BC, we're at 53.5% for the top marginal tax rate. For our American friends, that'll be $145,000 or $150,000. Anything over $145,000 US dollars of income in a year will be taxed at 53.5%. It's a high number, but I think worldwide, it's the fact that it kicks in at such a low starting point. Mm-hmm. The other big one, and this is the part this is actually one of the things I said to the family with the clinic. I said, you know, the one thing we do have to plan for is the risk of a capital gains inclusion rate change. This means that, so if we make something of value, your clinic, for example, you put in $100,000, you sell it for $200,000, $50,000 of that total $100,000 gain is taxable income to your corporation, and $50,000 is tax-free. With a corporation, it flows through a capital dividend account out of your corporation, but you only have to pay tax on half of it currently. The same thing if you bought a stock. If you bought a stock personally, you sold it, you made $100, $50 goes onto your income, and $50 is tax-free. Tries to get people to be motivated to invest. In 1972, that went down to 50%. But it's been 100% previously. It's been 75% previously. This is something that the NDP, the Socialist Party in Canada, has pushed to be changed, because they feel that
NDP's New Democrat Party for it's like, for the UK it's hard labor, and for the US there's nothing even close.
Yeah. It would, yes. I mean,
Vermont would
maybe
say that's pretty far left.
maybe and probably a Bernie Sanders, like, ideologically in line with a Sanders, I'd say.
Yes.
So if we see that change, we think it's pretty likely that we're going to see that change to 75%. That means that $75 of that 100 were taxable for you personally, and
Mm-hmm.
25% is non-taxable. The big thing
Mm-hmm.
is you're selling your practice for a few $1 million. What used to be 50% taxable, selling it for $4 million, $2 million flowed out tax-free through your capital dividend account. Now it's only going to be $1 million that flows out tax-free, and you have $3 million that's fully taxable, and needs to be taken out of the corporation long term. We have a little bit of a benefit around being able to have a lifetime capital gains exemption.
Mm-hmm.
That would be another area where it's just going to use that up faster.
Yeah.
Definitely, beyond the scope of a discussion like this, but certainly something to sort of make plans around, or if you have assets that could be sold to take your gains and you have the ability to do it, there might be some benefit to that. Definitely something to have a discussion with your accountant.
Yes.
And the other one, and I'm really on the fence if this is possible. I think we're going to need to see a cap on the primary residence exemption. In Canada, we have this thing where your primary residence, we've had massive increases in value. We have the ability for any family can choose one residence, essentially, and you get all the gains tax-free. Even when somebody passes away, it can go through probate, but there is no tax on that gain.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we see, multi-million dollars going through this side, I think they're either going to tighten up on the rules around how it's allowed, or they might put a global cap on it.
Yeah, just to give people outside of the Great White North a bit of perspective, Joe Clark back in the 80s, I believe, when he was running against Pierre Trudeau, our current prime minister's dad, was proposing as part of his election campaign, which he ended up losing, was we're going to make the mortgage payments for your homes, the interest tax write-offable, like it is in the United States. Anyway, he didn't win, and they didn't go ahead, and Canadians can't write off the interest for their mortgages. Now, the difference is I noticed when I was down in the States, is Canadians want to pay off their mortgage right away, as fast as they can, because you can't write off the interest for your mortgage. You can, and so we're motivated to be mortgage free as soon as possible and have more debt corporate. And the thing I noticed down in the States, because I was down there 2005, 2007, was people would then remortgage their house all the time because they can write off the interest on it. So you want a new car, or you want to go on a nice holiday, well, let's remortgage the house. And so people are just, icing the puck, shooting the problem down to the other end, boom, 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 boom. And then eventually the crisis hit where the houses prices went down. So all of a sudden the mortgage you have on your house was higher than the value of the house. So you got to pony up the cash, because now the bank's like, well, we can't loan you $1 million for a house that's worth $750. You need $250. There's $250,000 cash. It's just for thin air, and that caught a lot of people. Fortunately, in Canada, it didn't catch a lot of people. But yeah, so the benefit of being in Canada was like, well, you lived in that house, whether it was for a year, I think it was minimum 6 months, or your whole life, whatever you sold it for, tax free. So there was people in Vancouver who had houses back in the 50s and 70s that their parents had bought, and then they sold for multi-million dollars, and they bought it for $50,000 back in the day. The problem now is they probably will bring in those tax changes because it's rather palatable for people, but the housing market's crashing. So it'll be like they're bringing that tax change, but I don't know if that's going to really bring in tax revenue, because right now the market, Vancouver used to be hot, red hot. We had all those rich investors from Asia coming in, and they would buy houses and cash, and that's dried up. And we don't have people from Ontario, Quebec, or the US slapping cash to buy a house in the West End of Vancouver, or here, there, and everywhere. And so it's really changed. So it'll be interesting to see, because my whole life growing up in the Lower Mainland, the housing market just kept going. It would have tiny little blips, but now we're into a bit of a I think a downtrend. So tip to our foreign friends, if you're wanting to buy a condo at Whistler, there might be a fire sale on the Canadian dollar and the prices, because the mountain's been closed for a while. A lot of people own properties up there just because for investment purposes. So there's potentially Canada's for sale. You want to buy some land and their dollar's going down the toilet. We're Mexico North, but the beaches aren't as good. I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you have U.S. dollars internationally, I think it's probably not a bad time to consider it and see if things go on sale. But the other thing to remember, I mean, I work with a lot of young dentists. Mm-hmm. I've also made that point to them that, they're saying, oh, I can't believe I'm starting out this time. And I say, look, long term, you're still probably going to have a really good income. I'm sad for the practice owners that I work with, but if we have a situation where costs increase and real estate has dropped and all these different costs have gone down, we might be in a position where what feels like very overvalued practices, depending on what side you're on, maybe practices have gone on sale, or maybe practices are going to become more reasonable.
When I graduated from dental school back in the previous century, the practice values were from 40 to 60% of gross for a year, and 60% was for that, highly efficient practice. Now they're going for 100% of gross and higher in the Lower Mainland, and the banks were just starting, the last couple of years, to get a bit leery of some of these prices that people were getting. And there could be a bit of a sea change that potentially the price of practices could potentially come down. If I had my silver ball in front of me, crystal ball, I would say that I could see it going down, because there's a new normal approaching dentistry, and our costs are going to go up because we got all these PPE and these air filters and this and the other that maybe we won't need after the coronavirus, but I think the public and the staff are going to be looking for that anyway. So our costs are going to be going up. And, I don't know if our fees are going to be going up. So that profitability of dental is coming down, and the tax hammer, right now, everyone's getting checks from the government for this, that, and the other, and all these programs. Well, a payday is going to come in 2021 or maybe 2022 or something, but something's coming. And so, batten down the hatches and prepare for the storm. We have a pandemic right now, a viral pandemic, where we'll have a financial pandemic if you don't prepare yourself, right? And it's good to talk to people who know their stuff. They were busy, so I talked to you, Mark. No, kidding. Just kidding.
Lovely.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. This is a time to, reflect. It's a time to reset. My feeling is that things will be strong overall. Mm-hmm. You're right. The actual dollars maybe are going to be a little bit lower, but those dollars might also be, a little bit changed in that, if you're essentially the pool's gotten a little bit smaller. Maybe houses have gone down in value. We're not having to spend, quite as much on food. If we're not using as much gas, fuel prices won't be as crazy. In general, as a strata of incomes, I think dentistry is probably going to stay very relative to where it is once it all shakes out.
Yeah, traditionally it's been very resistant to recessions. Dentistry has been very good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I can tell you if I was working with people that were servicing the oil patch, or, in I don't know, travel agents or people that run hotels, that's a very, very tough business.
Mm-hmm.
It's discretionary spending, and it's completely tied to foreign things. To foreign consumption. Dentistry, people's teeth are going to hurt. We don't have a technological change where it's going to be done by a robot. it's by necessity still has to occur. And we might see some changes, but I think the relative position of dentistry is still going to be pretty similar in incomes.
Mm-hmm.
So compared to the average.
If we said for the shout out, top 5 shout outs for dentists, well, top 5 tips, and this is not just for Canucks, but for those other people as well. Just general financial things. What would you say?
General financial
Lamborghini's
things.
on sale. Go buy it right now. No,
definitely not.
There we go.
But gloves off if it's time to replace the family vehicle. Gloves off. I would take a little bit more time. What's that?
Bikes are great.
Well, I mean, take some time. Think about what sort of suits your needs. I'm from European peasant stock, so my natural default is to plant cabbages. But say, okay, what are the things that are going to be valuable? Where we're going to get value long term? What's going to be lower my overall cost? But this might be the time where you buy the plug-in hybrid that you wouldn't have bought before. On the practice side, looking overall at efficiency and being able to take a step back. And this is if people are at that point where they feel they have the emotional energy to do this. But boy, is this a good time to write a policies and procedures. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is how much value there is to that if you're looking at selling your practice. Mm-hmm. We always talk on our side, the financial side, we talk about purifying your corporation, meeting the LCG rules, all these nuances and all these technical things, and they make a huge difference in how much tax you pay. But your practice is more valuable if you have a clear policies and procedures written out. You have different proper roles for different people. This is a time to invest in that. There was a great story about I think it was Imperial Margarine during the war. They during the Second World War in England, they kept on advertising. They weren't even allowed to brand it. They weren't allowed to have branded margarine. But they continued with their marketing and became dominant because they continued with doing the right stuff at the time when everybody else was going to ground and sort of avoiding that. So going in and planning that stuff for your practice, I see all sorts of things online about people saying, oh yeah, okay, well I had time, so I went in and I reorganized all my reorganized all these supplies, or I rerouted my wiring, or I made these changes that I've always planned to do. So capitalize on the time and the forced time we have available. Taking a look, the one area I would say is if you have been aggressively paying off your mortgage, it's something that we very often see. Dentists tend to be very goal oriented. So the goal usually is, I want that mortgage paid off in 5 years, 10 years, what have you. Mm-hmm. Take a close look at that. We've seen a significant drop in interest rates, and we're expecting a pretty significant increase. We might be looking at more taxes going forward. Take a look at that part of your plan and say, if I'm paying 53.5% to get out an extra $10,000 to put on my mortgage, which is saving me less than 3%, maybe we need to smooth that out. Keep to sort of look at those things. Look at your investment portfolio. And when we talk about the insurance side, we'll have a deeper dive into that.
The devil being that it's expensive now to get your money out of your corporation. It's not likely to be cheaper in the future.
Yeah, well, and that's
so
it
might be worth it's a bit of a pinch now, but I don't think it's ever going to be cheaper to get your money out of a corporation.
And that's why I like the idea of dropping on a line of credit, for example. On the mortgage, it's a one-way street, right? Mm-hmm. So if you were giving me the choice right now and I had an extra $10,000, an extra $50,000, let's say, you gave me the choice, either drop that on your mortgage or drop that into your TFSA.
Yes.
Assuming it fits with my risk profile, I'm dropping that into my TFSA. If I have the ability to make money, and having that money structured well, and assuming I can take the risk on, I'd rather see it doing something productive, and being available after tax. I am a big believer in pulling money out of a corporation and keeping enough, even if you have to pay some tax. I don't like paying the very highest range, but in general, if I'm getting money out of a corporation for a client and they're around 30% average tax, I feel like we're doing okay. 30% went to the government, just gets to be too painful when it's over 50% or over. So, I try to use as much of those 30% dollars as I can. That's why I tend to take a long-term view and say, let's keep the money coming out, even early years. You want to build up your, you want to build up your investment accounts and all those things. But like you say, if it's in the corporation, it's still exposed to the government, right? Once you have it personally, there's still some tax exposure, but
you're in a bigger pool now. You're like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
You're with all the voters. It's personal money. And once they attack personal money, they're attacking voters. It's easier for them to attack small corporations. But once money's personal, now you're like everyone else.
Well, yeah, 50% of the taxes are essentially paid for by the top 10% of income earners, which is where my clients live. They only have 10% of the votes. So the person who's offering to cut checks to everybody, he has 90% of the people he doesn't have to worry about.
Yeah. So try to blend in with a herd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if 5 colossal mistakes that someone could make right now financially, that you would just say total wrong thing to do. Young dentist.
Well, maxing out your line of credit to invest in. This 2 years ago. This is what I was invariably told 2-3 years ago. I was saying, to students that were still in school who were saying, well, I want to take money out and I want to put it into real estate because I can pay off my entire dental education just because I bought a place and I get to live there and then I can sell it and I'm going to make all this money and I'm going to pay for dental school. Say, okay, what if that doesn't happen? Sure enough, the last few years, I've got a few clients who are paying off properties that they bought while they were in school. So those big changes, taking on a lot of debt and putting it into the markets, I would be pretty leery of. Strong borrow to invest strategies. That's definitely something. It's something where you are magnifying your risk profile. I would be careful about making too many big changes. And then on the other side, not opening your investment your investment statements. Those things could be a pretty serious mistake. And then when we talk about the tax stuff, there are a few heads up in there to do with structure that it really makes sense to plan for. Yeah, the other side is, take this time to reach out to your accountant and make sure that if you've got a 2 to 5 year sort of timeline for when you do want to sell a practice. Of course, the valuation is going to be changing, but there are certain structural things you want to do to make sure you're on side for.
No, I know, but we're chatting about mistakes. Don't sell your practice right now. Don't buy a practice right now.
If you can get the right money for your practice right now, if somebody's willing to take the previous valuation, that's. I would be leery of using any current valuation for buying a practice. Yes. I've got three clients who have been engaged with practice owners where they're going back and forth and doing valuation. They're kind of working their way through to get an offer.
Do you see interest rates going up, or will that just be so hard on the economy? Because the money's just being spread around by the governments like it's going out of style. Right. And then when this virus is passed, are they just going to keep printing greenbacks in the US so that everyone's like, okay, never mind about it?
Well,
and could interest rates go up because they're like, just the world is a floating cash and it's just getting a bit silly?
Yeah.
As a final question, because we're reaching the end.
Yeah. So, my feeling on it really is, I can't fully say,
Come on. Lock you down. Give it to
I
me.
would want to. So my plan basically is at this point when rates are low and we have the risk of that, I would be defaulting to saying, okay, I'm willing to pay a little more if it fits within my cash flow to lock things in. I would try to lock in this rate for the amount of time. If you can do it for the amount of time it's going to take you to pay off a particular loan, for example, I would lock it in as long as I could to get as low a rate as I could, even if the long term is going to be a higher.
Well, is
cost
that the
now.
case, or do you think we're going to keep it low just to keep everything ticking over? Because that's the
I
other
think we're
alternative.
going to have to raise it. I think we're going to have to raise it at some point. We're going to have to attract. We're going to have to attract those dollars, that money. I mean, the government can always print more. Then we're going to see more inflation, and we're getting to a tipping point at that point where if we're underwater, then we could be into the next Zimbabwe or Venezuela, right? That's that big cliff on the other side. So I think if they see that coming, if they're having to print money to be able to stay afloat, I would want to have things locked down as much as possible. I think, to my mind, I can't say that we will see rates increase. I would be willing to spend a little bit more money to insulate myself against that risk.
Lock it in because it's traditionally low. Yeah, one of the financial guys I know, he's like, well, you pay a little bit for locking in, so I always float, but now is maybe a good time to reconsider that option. Well, Mark, any final thoughts? Because I think we covered a lot of good info there on the financials.
Great. Final thoughts, really, I mean, step one, it's the old, the oxygen mask drop. Put that on yourself first. So I have clinic owners who are concerned about their staff, and they're getting feedback saying, oh, you should be getting this wage subsidy. You'd be earning $800 some odd a month versus a week versus $500 a week. Cash flow is your clinic or is your investments. Take care of yourself first. Make sure that the business is okay, and then plan for the other things that you could do, which would be good. And a lot of that can be having the time to clearly look at whether it's your investments or your practice or your writing of policies and procedures, doing those things. Try to use the time for something that will make you feel good about what you've done.
Perfect. That's wonderful. I always wondered when they give those instructions and they say, make sure you put the air mask on yourself before you put on your kid. I wonder if some narcissists out there going, well, yeah, of course I would. What are you talking? You need to tell me that? Must be looking around like, of course I'd put it on me. me. But yeah,
I mean, I think the two of us would probably be exactly those people where you'd be passed out in the aisle because then your kids would all have them on. But that's super hard to do. We feel strongly about I own a business in Indonesia, as you know. I feel strongly about my staff. That's they're always one of my first concerns. But I've told them right off the hop. I said, look, if we're in a situation where I have to choose between what happens, the business has to come first because it allows us to do all the other good work we do. So mask on you first.
Yeah, there we go. Well, that's fantastic, Mark. Thank you so much. Sure. And the next segment, insurance. Yes. We're going to sex it up. It's awesome. It's going to be the best.
Great. Thanks, Joel.
Hey, no worries. Thank you, man.